Hey, hello, and welcome, bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Welcome to another talk of Pixelatel 2021, and I am really happy and thrilled because we are all in for a treat. You really can talk about the story of animation and visual effects and cinema in general without talking about Joel Aaron. I could, if I started reading all his credits and contributions, we would take up all the hour, but let me mention some of your favorites and my favorites: Jurassic Park, Star Wars The Revenge of the Sith, Pirates of the Caribbean, Star Wars The Clone Wars, and of course, the reason we're all here today, Star Wars The Bad Batch. Welcome, Joel. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Christian. Thank you so much. It's exciting to be here. Very exciting to be here and talk to you guys again. Thank you very much.
It's an honor. You're already a friend of the festival, and welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Like Christian said, I'm Joel Aaron. I've been with Lucasfilm 30 years this week. So it's been a long time. And through that period, I've learned a lot of tricks and moved on to animation and found my home with Clone Wars and Dave Filoni and the entire animation team and our studios that we work with. And I'm going to spend a little time and walk you through how we do our show. And we only have a certain amount of time, so I'm not going to be able to touch on a lot of things, but I'm going to try and keep this brief with the presentation so that we can do a little Q&A afterwards, because I love talking to you guys, and it's kind of great to get conversation going and get some inspiration started for anybody else that wants to jump on this path. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll get started. All right. Assuming everybody is seeing that. So I started at Industrial Light and Magic in the summer of 1991. And through the course of working on, at the time, 1 or 2 films would come through ILM. And through the course of working on those, we developed tips and tricks to advance our technology, advance the way that we tell stories visually. And one of the areas I found myself greatly attracted to at ILM was the method of cheating, of taking the simplest route possible to get something done. And all 4 of these shots you see up here are exactly that. And I could probably talk for, like Christian said, for hours about like what I did to cheat a lot of these shots to get it done, to make it not be as hard as possible and to put as much craftsmanship into the work as possible. And it allowed me to connect with a group of people at ILM that were that same way. so that we all had that same thinking. Like Bill George, who's a very, very well-known visual effects supervisor at Industrial and Magic, was the first person to kind of encourage me to make paintings move instead of letting the computer do it for you. And that's always been my path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a little bit. Now you know about me. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how we do our show. So we have available to us the Lucasfilm archives. And the archives are a great way to get a peek at how Star Wars was created, because we get to hold the objects in our hand. We get to look at it and see its I don't want to say flaws, but the level of execution that was used in order to fool the viewer into thinking what you're seeing is real. And this image of the Death Star up is actually built by Bill George, and it was for Return of the Jedi. And the thing that really alarmed me with this was all the sections that are under construction. When you see all that paneling, those are just clear pieces of plastic with painted lines on them to give you this illusion that there is depth there. And it was tricks like that that I started to learn. And by the time I got into Clone Wars, I started applying them more and more so that we could spend more time on our craftsmanship and our look, and not worry about having to build something that's very heavy like this. So in the archives, we're, like I said, we're able to hold things and get the flavor of what it took to make those movies back then. And one of them was, what I love is the simplicity, the absolute simplicity of movie making. And briefly, I've spent quite a bit of time on set working on feature films, and you see kind of the shortcuts that are taken just to get the shot. And that's something that our team applies heavily here, because there's something about creating something by hand and putting it out there, especially in something that's like Star Wars, that you're thinking that it's this big glossy machine of perfection. But you look at the screen right side there, and that's the actual breastplate switcher box that Luke has on his chest, right? But if you look, it's just a piece of wood that's painted. The lines aren't straight. The buttons don't work. You look at the helmet in the middle from the Battle of Hoth, and you can see that it's just those lines aren't right. The imperfections in all the helmets that were made. One of my favorites is with Star Wars is the mold for the Stormtrooper wasn't really dry, so they went and picked it up, and they wanted to make copies of it. So now every single copy of that Stormtrooper helmet has that slight imperfection of when they picked up the original mold when it wasn't dry yet. And you never notice that stuff. So knowing that you can get away with imperfections is something that definitely, as an artist, as a CG artist, you need to kind of tell yourself to just back off a little bit and let's just tell the story and not obsessed about how beautiful things look. So the other place we go to all the time, this is something that Andre Kirk, our absolutely amazing art director, who's been with us, he's been working on the show longer than me. We obsess over the original art that presented Star Wars to the world. And it's important, just like I was talking about the props and any of the elements that you see in those images, that you just need to get the story across. And here you can look at these three images, and immediately you can almost hear that TIE fighter. You know, you look at the original C-3PO and the original R2-D2 that looks a lot like Chopper, if you notice that. The simplicity of Ralph McQuarrie images are that, you know, you have these skies and the land and these objects that are just vast color. And it's something that George and Ralph McQuarrie in the original Star Wars movies, they tried to rely on the simplicity of telling the story and punching home as much as possible the effect and emotion of that story with the visuals. So it's a very delicate balance of making sure that what we do on our show doesn't um, make it too CG or try and complement the film too much to be exactly like the films. We find this happy medium there that I've always felt that while watching original Clone Wars and all the shows we've done, and now for the Bad Batch, it's this visual that you see and your brain fills in the rest, right? And it's amazing how that works, because you can go back and you can watch the original Star Wars movie, watch episode 4. They got away with murder on that stuff. You go back and you look at it and you're like, well, that's not how I remember it. Oh, all right, so I'm seeing all the flaws now. But back then you got to think, if you're a 10, 11-year-old kid, that's exactly what it is that you want to see. So all these Rapnapori images have also a common color theme that has always dripped into our palette for lighting and colors, which is this blue and the orange, the warmth. And it's another important element in telling stories about good and evil, so that you can use those colors and that look along with our style. And it's a subtle thing. It's a very subtle thing, but it's a cinematic thing. And you look at this image and you see that trooper standing outside and he's all bleached, almost neutral gray, and everyone else has color. So the cinematography of Star Wars: The Bad Batch took a jump from where we were at the end of Clone Wars. When we finished Clone Wars, we were dabbling a little bit in hitting more of a cinematic look without making it look like we've abandoned the hand-touched artwork. And part of that is being strict about the lenses that we use, it's the same kit lenses that George used, and I'll cover that in a bit. And it's the level of depth of field and letting that tell the story as well, because that's how our eyes work. And on Clone Wars, everything was vivid, clear, sharp. Occasionally we'd take the background slightly out of focus, but we weren't being artists about it. And now we are approaching these episodes as if each one is a feature film. So each shot, every shot in every episode has a unique quality to it. It has a specific lens. Its movement is studied. We try not to do camera moves that a real camera would not do. We try and emulate studio tricks, rear projection, stuff to make things a little bit easier for us to do, that allows us, again, to get more of that cinematic approach. All of the work that is done is painted. There's occasional procedural elements used in like if we need noise or something like that, but everything has a hand touch to it. So even our planet ball, everything is going to have a paint stroke. So I was talking about the lenses. And if you heard me talk before, you may have seen this animation of me scrolling through a document before. But when we started doing Rebels, I had the crazy idea of, while leaving the archives one day, to ask Maddie, who was the manager of the film archives, if they had any turnover sheets, any script coordinator or continuity asset sheets for the way they were shooting. She got back to me within an hour, and the next day, and for a couple days after that, I went back to the film archives and we were able to extract every type of lens used by George and Gil in the original episode 4. And that's what you're seeing here. So I was able to look at every single one of those and know for every shot which camera was used. And then came the hard work of going through every single shot in Star Wars and figuring out which take George picked and which lens it was. And there's a few I had to figure out, but from there we're able to get a really good lens set. So once that lens set is done, the story artists go to work, and they can use any of the lenses we got. So it's not like a random thing where they can grab like a 16 millimeter or a 72 millimeter. You know, in the beginning of Clone Wars, it was like you would have a shot that would be like a 14 mil, and then you'd cut to a 22 mil of the same shot. So it was changing. So we had to tighten that up. And by doing that, it forced us to look at how we do our depth of field. So I knew that each lens would have a certain availability of depth to it. So a shot like this is a 40 millimeter lens, and I know that the characters are leaving bombs all over the backs of characters, so I can keep rack focusing back and forth. If this was a much wider lens, I wouldn't be able to have that much depth of field. And it's that little thing that gives it that cinematic quality, because often you'll have a very wide shot like in a standard cartoon, and they'll blur the background to make it look out of focus, but that doesn't look right. It's not actual. So here we try and keep it actual. So a 40 mil may have different depth of field than a 50 or a 75 or a 100. So I'm going to do this shot. We're going to see a breakdown of this, but what you're seeing here is our storyboard, and we use a proprietary tool that has been long developed at ILM and Lucasfilm, and for Lucasfilm Animation primarily, to tell these stories. And this is a 3D package. It allows us to bring in assets and do simple animation and get the cameras worked out and get our assets in place so we know what's going to be a matte painting, what's going to be an asset. From there, if the whole episode's done, we then send the shots to our overseas partner, CGCG. And like I was telling Christian earlier, I've worked with CGCG now for the better part of 14, almost 15 years. And they're family. They're our family. It's how we like working. Even when we bring other studios on, they're part of our family. And we work in a nice kind of volley of technology that needs to be developed in order to execute the complexity of the episodes. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get as much artistic quality in that the technology will allow us, and then where it breaks or we can't go anymore, we find ways to make that happen. So we're not trying to hit every episode with a big hammer. We're trying to find those little tiny increments where we can get better and better. And that's every episode for us. Every episode there is a challenge that allows us to take it more. But here you're seeing the layout from that story. And the layout is when they've put all of the high-res assets in and it's ready to go. Now, design and asset creation is the real core of what the episode's going to look like, from a character to a prop, to a cup, to any little thing. Everything is designed on our show meticulously, and there were a lot of designs that were inherited from Clone Wars that we brought over, and Andre Kirk, who is our art director now for the Bad Batch, has taken these and we've kind of slowly plussed things up. We found ways to put more detail in material, make cloth feel more like cloth, but not lose that painted touch. And so these designs are given to CGCG, and we work with them to develop the look of the material at different, making sure that the character can perform as expected, as you'll see at the animation with the calisthenics of Wrecker here. But the asset creation, everything's happening pretty fast. Now I'm going to pause real quick here and just give you a scope of how things work for us. I'm talking about like one shot, one character here, but we work in a waterfall schedule. So we have many episodes running at the same time. At any given time, you could run your finger on a date on the calendar, and there's at least 4 episodes that are in the oven getting rendered. But you're also seeing episodes that are just finishing the script process. There's some episodes that are in layout. There's some that are in animation. There's some in effects development. Some are in post. I work very closely with our colorist, Sean Wells, so we know what we're going to get at the very end. We don't black box the color grade. We actually know what we're going to do in the color grade all the way through. So it really takes all of this information that's happening and think about it in one episode, but know that there's many episodes going at the same time. So my brain, as you can tell now as I'm losing thought, jumps around from episode to episode to episode to episode to episode to make sure it's all right. And we're all doing that same thing. Dave Filoni is, of course, the master of that. He will know what every character said, did. He's brilliant that way, and always gives us incredible feedback as we continue to push the envelope of what we're doing. So here is Wrecker, to give you an idea. This is Wrecker as he came in as his final asset. So all the textures created, the incandescent lights. Everything hand painted. Kind of our look, to give you an idea here, is if you look at the shoulder where the red is, those hash marks, a lot of these paint brushes that we use are brushes that were used on Clone Wars. So we try and keep that vein in there. Whenever I'm doing effects work and the effects work needs to have a look like our show, I will use those brushes, or I'll do a method to give it that quality. Here, look at the back of Wrecker's head up close. It looks like someone just dragged a fork all over him. That's a pretty scar. And we'll always compare height with our clone. And then we'll always do a lineup to make sure everybody is in check with their look and their height. Now, animation is another miracle of our show, in that in this short period of time that we have for each episode, Keith Kellogg, our director of animation, is working closely with the animation team on usually multiple episodes at the same time, doing performance references in his own office by recording himself in video of what a character should do, behave, emote, gesture. We will also have our cycles for each character that he will work out with everyone. The real amazing thing here is that it's keyframe animated. We tried mocapping on Clone Wars, and it was great, but it's a lot of work. We've just found our rhythm with keyframe animation. But the only thing that saves us with keyframe animation is our cycles. And this is something that Keith has worked out on all of our characters, and we're still developing and still improving the look on, is how our characters can perform in a cached version of themselves. So that way an animator doesn't need to animate a character running down a street. It's all these savings that we can have so that he can focus on other things, which are the facial performance. And that's where we've really, I believe, with our animation, jumped quite a bit, because we're able now to have a simple rig with simple controllers and increase the topology of the geometry of our faces to give us any expression that we want quickly. So this is a calisthenic that's run on every single one of our characters so that we know exactly how it's going to behave or break, as you're seeing in the case of his eyelid there. So when you watch The Bad Batch and you see the trailer, just know that, you know, we're obsessing over face shapes, brow expressions, head position, angles, eyes, how everything is directed by Keith. So where I'm going to spend a little bit more time is kind of where my playground is in lighting and visual effects. And I've been lighting CG since 1991. And it's something that I absolutely love. About 20 years ago, I started to really get into what it was to light a movie or what it was to light something so that it had something that was a quality that didn't just look like you turned on some lights and rendered it. And some of the things that I've learned, especially on Clone Wars and in working with Dave and George, especially, is that I learned the importance of a silhouette shape. Well, that it sounds so simple and so basic. In artwork, you'll always try and work with a silhouette shape. You'll always want to make sure that you can recognize that character from its silhouette shape. But it's something that I obsess quite a bit about on our show, to do something that other shows don't, which is that I like to light for the shot. So we do not set up lights for a sequence and let the characters go. Every shot is lit so that I can get an expression or a silhouette read very clearly from a character. At the same point, I'm thinking of the composition of the shot, where my eye is, where is my eye going to be in the next shot, where was it in the previous shot. So all of these elements I've learned through the years of working on ILM movies, spending a lot of time listening to George and Dave do editorial reviews of explaining what we need to do a shot. But the biggest switch for me came when I was doing color correction with Sean Wells, our master colorist. He and we've done everything together since season 2 of Clone Wars. We're in there, and George just walks in the theater, sits down right beside me, and all I could think of was he smelled really nice. And he sits down and he said, "Well, looking at this, I was looking at this episode, and I think you guys can push it. I think you guys can push the light, blow it out, make dark dark, and make bright bright." And ever since that was if you watch Clone Wars, that was the Zygerian arc, where Obi-Wan is captured by a bunch of slave traders. It was that arc where we made a great big change. And ever since then, we've just plussed up from there. Now, when we do these episodes, I usually have a gigantic lighting guide I give to them, and I'll show you a little bit of stuff like that. But we also have our massive library of Star Wars material to use. So everything that's ever been shot, drawn, scanned, built, exists in some form in our library to go through and use for reference. So that is heaven. It's also a great way to burn time that you shouldn't be doing, because you start looking for something, all of a sudden you are on downward slope of looking for reference, and all of a sudden you're looking at storyboards from episode 4 and you totally forgot what you were looking for in the first place, so it's pretty cool. But it allows us also to see things that how it was shot on the day, and to actually get real color information of what characters look like on these sets, what type of reflection, how the reflections behave, what type of specular, what type of light, how big's the light, how little is the silhouette. And so that's where I look at all these images and I try and pull it out. And you'll notice that same theme that we apply to all of our shows here. It's just that Star Wars: A New Hope was lit a lot like a black and white movie. 1977, color film was still, big. It wasn't necessarily new at the time, but there was a lot of older cinematographers that lit more like black and white. And that's how A New Hope is lit, which is pretty cool, because you learn quite a bit from seeing everything. Like, you look at the profile of Han, Luke, and Chewie and Obi-Wan in the cockpit there on the bottom left, and you can see that rim light on their face, that little triangle of light that's hit them, how each person is lit, how the cockpit is lit, the gobo shapes, the shapes of the window frame that move around. So you learn a lot from things that are shot in a black and white form. Other things that are really helpful are behind the scenes images, because behind the scenes images show me where the lights are. They show me where the crew is. If you look on an image on the left, you're going to see Peter Mayhew all the way in the background looking at the inside of his Chewbacca mask. So there's a lot that can be learned from these images. It's pretty cool. So if I were to ever go on set again, or if I ever see these images, I'm not looking at what the picture looks like. I'm looking how they lit it. I want to know how they lit it. Now, when we light our characters, one of the things that took the longest was to educate our team in understanding classic art. This is something that I learned from Dave Filoni on about the first week I met him. We walked over to one of the buildings at Skywalker Ranch because he wanted to show me a picture, a painting on the wall. And it was an N.C. Wyeth painting, of a frontiersman standing in a river next to a canoe. And he's like, I want our show to look like this. Just looks like it is just painted and drawn, but have the quality of fine art. And that's where the education started for our team, of learning how to light like Rembrandt and learning how to light like Vermeer, so that you could light simply. And you look at the image of Rembrandt there and how the screen right side of his face is silhouetted with his hair against that back wall, right? So there's these silhouette shapes are coming into view, as well as the really nice Rembrandt lighting. Now, Rembrandt lighting is something that I push quite a bit. There's a time where there's a few episodes in Rebels where I was like, I want every shot, doesn't matter, every shot 3/4 down, 45-degree angle Rembrandt lighting. I want to see the Rembrandt triangle on every shadow side of the face. And the Rembrandt triangle, if you look at the screen right side of his face, there is a little bit of light on that cheek, and that is called the Rembrandt triangle. It's the same with my photography. Everyone's like, how do you get these pictures look so great? I'm just looking for the Rembrandt triangle. Once I got that lined up, I just start talking to the person and take pictures. Right? So we're applying that quite a bit on characters like my new favorite, Omega, here. And if you look, even like on that top image, I've got that little bit of light hitting the corner of the cheek. So there's always a Rembrandt triangle. There is always a way to help silhouette the character by way of making one side of their face darker. Okay, it's pretty fun trick. Now, lighting concept is where we get our color palette and our look for an episode. And if you've seen The Bad Batch, this is our first episode, 101A, we know it as, and we're all in the snow. Everything's in the snow, or we're in Camino. So you have this challenge of, well, snow, we got to make it look cooler. Camino, we look white and gray because we want to go back to those colors. So Molly Denmark, our senior color key artist, she's amazing. She's been with the company quite a long time and has worked with us for years. Molly gets a few weeks to paint about 15 images, and they're all based off of those layout frames. So if you remember that layout footage that we saw earlier, she'll usually grab a frame of that. I'll go through an episode and pick the shots we want to do, and she'll paint over, and we'll work as a team to make sure that we can get all the information in these as possible, so when we talk to CG, they know what needs to be done. That includes whether the background's a matte painting, what type of effects are needed, where our focus is going to be in the shot, how dark it's going to be. And to really appreciate Molly's artwork, if you find any online, just get them and look at them as large as possible, because she is just an incredible talent of being able to quickly throw light down and get depth and get our shape. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get, like I said, the emotion of the shot as clear to you as possible while paint lighting concepts that eventually turn into matte paintings. And if you've seen the season so far, in the last few minutes of the season, you might see this matte painting. And this is Molly. All these lighting concept that eventually turned into the map painting. So you can see if you watch, CG nailed it. We did have to, go through our usual process of, once we see it with 3D and there's a slight camera move, we start adding and plussing it up and making it look better. But the lighting concepts are kind of the golden standard for it. Now, it's with fire, I was talking a little bit earlier about how I got to make something look like it's painted. And so here you could just see it's a fire element, but I'm more concerned with how it looks. I'm going to stop it so that on any given frame, it's going to look like it's painted. Okay. Same with clouds. With clouds, I was like, well, we don't need to really build them. Why don't we paint them? So I painted 26 clouds, and we can assemble them. They're all flat. It's all 2D images. And you can assemble them and fly through them, fly around them, move them slowly, make it look like we're flying over them. Put this in the background, and that way we're not having to render clouds. Instead, I have these painted clouds moving. This is the trick that usually you'd see in anime, Studio Ghibli movies. They'll always take layered paintings and just kind of move them. So we use that same method here. Now, if it's an element that we don't have, or it's going to cost a lot of money to shoot or to render, I'll shoot it. I haven't done it a lot recently, but what you're seeing here is from Rebels, where the CGC, our bid was so over, we there's no way to do this sequence. So I went and grabbed some salt, sugar, and sweet and low, poked some holes in the bottom of a cup, set up my new iPhone that shot slow motion, and just recorded everything on my iPhone, and then masked it out and comped it over the shots. So all that dust you see in those shots in the bottom right, that's just those elements blowing in camera. That's it. So it was a really fun way to even show CG how we did this, and to say that, look, you could just do what they did back in the old days, back in the 70s, when they made movies with props. So the final shot, as you see here, right there. Notice the depth of field for the bomb. There it is. Rack back over. And he blows everybody up. Lots of fun. Fun sequence. Very fun sequence. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play our trailer, and everything I've talked about. The paintings, the layers, the brush strokes, the faking, the cheating. Here's a really good example. I had to add depth to this shot that's going to open with the trailer, and I took one of my cloud cards and I just put it over the shot that I got back from CG, and I just kind of moved it and scaled it, and it gave the illusion that I'm flying by a cloud. But it's just those little tiny things that just help frame the shot so I can get the audience looking where they need to look. So I'll go ahead and play this whole thing through, and then after that, we'll do a little Q&A.
Times have changed. Things were clearer when we were just soldiers.
Why aren't you fighting for the Empire?
We're different. Our priorities have shifted.
Good thing you met me then.
Hey!
I'm going to stop sharing. So I covered quite a bit in a short period of time. But let me know if you guys have any questions. Go back, look at any slides or anything like that.
Amazing talk, Joel. I really want to thank you, for sharing all these details with the audience. And we already have questions. So
Oh,
I'm
good.
gonna, I'm gonna start shooting. The first one is from Sylvia. She says that her dream is to work in Star Wars,
Hmm.
and she asks, "What do you see the future of Star Wars art-wise? Where is it heading?"
Hmm. I'll tell you, that's a good question. That's a really good question. A deep question. Um, you know, I don't think it's going far from where we are now. I think if you go if you go too far away from what we all fell in love with, it turns into something else. And that's something that we try and hold true to what we do now. Like even for Bad Batch has the look of the Clone Wars. When we do stuff moving forward, I'm hoping we stick with this look so we can keep honing it and craft it. And I feel that's the first, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back. It's like, to me, that's the core. We have to keep looking back at that. So the art style, I think it's always going to have that, the the blood of Ralph McQuarrie's artwork in there. That has to always be there. I think you can advance it. You can, like Andre Kirk does an amazing job of having to design and do technical creations for things that are artwork that kind of push the envelope of what we're doing visually. It's not as if you go back and look at Clone Wars, it's like, our holograms for destroyers were just triangles. As we got better, it was the actual geometry. So it's like we're finding ways to get into, but I think we're always going to hold on to this art style. No matter what, I think it needs to always go back to Ralph McQuarrie.
Thanks, Joel. Here's another question from Luis, and this is very interesting because it says that the sounds adds so much to the aesthetics, to the visual. Like when you see some of the scenes that are dark, you could actually, you know, hear the space in the scene. So how do you work, with the art department and the sound department? If you work together, or if at the end they just add it up and it's just magic happens.
The way that's a really good question, because we were talking about it earlier about the sound. Like, you need to listen to this stuff really loud. Brad Rao, he's our supervising director. He is constantly, when we're watching these episodes, evolve. He's always thinking of what it's going to sound like, what it's going to do. Our Dave Collins, our sound designer, and the guys up at Sky Sound that do all the work, have a library that only sound designers would just love to get a hold of. And it adds so much. Like, honestly, I am always shocked when I watch our episodes at home, because I'm watching it then without my work eyes and without my work ears, and I'm hearing everything that we talked about, how things will sound. Whether it's a gun that Wrecker has, whether it's a ship flying over, a ship landing, a character sleeping, everything is obsessed